This is Mike Harrington, here reflecting on two words I know you probably don't want to hear. No goal. Wednesday, June 19th. It was the 25th anniversary of Game 6 of the 1999 Stanley Cup Final. And you probably don't need me to recite chapter and verse what happened that night in Reed Midland Arena. The Sabres losing to the Dallas Stars 2-1 in the third overtime on the controversial Brett Hull goal. But I'm here just to reflect a little bit on some of my memories from that night. I was not covering the Buffalo Sabres for the Buffalo News back then. I was simply in the stands. I even looked up my ticket stub, section 307, row 11, $67 for the Stanley Cup Final in 1999. I bet that would be maybe $670 nowadays if the Sabres ever got back there. But it was a different time. As I talked to Lindy Ruff last week, he reflected on how obstruction, hooking, holding were the way hockey was played back then. There might have been 60 penalties if it was played under today's rules, and it was very difficult to score a goal. You had Dominic Hasek in the goal at one end. You had Ed Belfour in the goal at the other end. A bad goal against Hasek in the first period, a Stu Barnes goal in the second period. It's 1-1, and that's it. And you really felt sitting in the stands like we might be there all night. Went through the first overtime. Second overtime, James Patrick did hit a crossbar. Third overtime, same thing. The start of the periods, if you don't score a goal, it's going to go a while. And it was almost 1:50 in the morning when Brett Hull finally poked the puck in. And at that point, when you're in the stands, you don't really think, even though we had seen so many goals called back that year, we saw everyone rush the ice. The Zamboni door was opened, by whom we'll never really know. The caps were handed out. The T-shirts were handed out. The one thing I noticed was Lindy Ruff suddenly back on the Sabres bench, yelling at someone. We didn't know at the time. Of course, now we know he was yelling at Gary Bettman, trying to find out what happened to the review. They gave the Stars a Stanley Cup, and we got up and left. You know, during those previous intermissions, you saw children being put on tables in the concourse by their parents who wanted to see the end of the game. By 2:30 in the morning, walking out, you just thought it was over. And then all of a sudden, the CBC broadcast was on the televisions in the concourse, and they were talking about, was the puck in the crease? Was Brett Hull in the crease? I couldn't believe it. They started showing the replay. There was one TV on the ESPN broadcast, and you could see his foot clearly in the crease. Now, I've told people this for a long time. There's no problem with this goal. It's a good goal in over 100 years of NHL hockey. There's no problem today with that play. In 1999, based on how it was called, it was probably no goal. I talked to Ken Hitchcock at the Hockey Hall of Fame for my column in the Buffalo News back in November, and he said the Dallas Stars were the greatest checking team he had ever coached, and that's why they won. He had a few chuckles about the controversy involved. Lindy Ruff that night met with Brian Lewis, the supervisor officials, to talk about the infamous memo the teams had been issued a few weeks earlier. Brian Lewis said that night on CBC famously, well, you're not really going to get much satisfaction from people. Last week, talking to Lindy Ruff, he just said a lot of different things collided at the wrong time. Overtime, the winning goal of the series, 1:50 in the morning, people rushing the ice right away. And here's the bottom line. It's Game 6. The Sabres still need to score if that goal is wiped out. They need to go to Dallas and win Game 7. No goal did not cost the Sabres the Stanley Cup. It cost them a legitimate chance to win one, absolutely. But it also is just a footnote in franchise history and NHL history that'll never go away. Never go away, at least, until the Sabres someday try to get back in that position. Of course, they have to make the playoffs first, but that's another whole story. No goal, June 19th, 1999, into the early morning hours of June 20th. We'll never forget it. Lindy Ruff and Ken Hitchcock with a few thoughts in my column in the Buffalo News. This is Mike Harrington reporting.